Smacznego всім. Bon appetit. Smacznego is how we say bon appetit in Ukrainian. I hope everyone is enjoying this delicious lunch. If you are, as I trust you are, please say a special thank you to Mariella Taft, the wife of the U.S. ambassador. She was the essential gastronomic advisor. So, compliments to her. Thank you very much. And please, if you're sitting at my table, save me some of the pizza. Pepperoni, please. I didn't have a chance to eat it, okay? I know that people here, most of you feel there is really an important election happening, and it is in October, and it is the Ukrainian parliamentary race. I agree that is very important, but there is another important election happening in the world, and that is the presidential election in the United States. We are very, very lucky because we are going to have an opportunity now to hear from two of the key players in the Democratic and Republican camps. They are Bill Daley. He was Chief of Staff for Obama. He was Secretary of Commerce under Clinton. He is also a man with very broad and deep business experience, speaking on the Democratic side. And then we are going to hear from Speaker Newt Gingrich, a really historic Republican speaker and a candidate who came very, very close to winning the Republican nomination, and someone with really tremendous insight into what is happening on the Republican side. So, Bill, Speaker Gingrich, can I ask you guys to separate yourselves from this delicious meal and come on up? Okay, Bill, I was expecting you actually to vault up onto this stage. We arrived together at 11 o'clock, but Bill actually worked out this morning, so that's why I'm expecting athletic feet. Please sit down. Okay, I'm going to start by asking Bill to say a few words, and I'm going to start with him because he represents the incumbent side. And then we're going to hear from Speaker Gingrich. So, Bill, here's my question to you. Who do you think is going to win and why?
The president, because he deserves to get reelected.
Okay, done. We expect a little more depth. Come on.
Okay, a little more depth. Let me thank you very much to the foundation and to Victor for inviting me, and I am really honored to be here and to share the stage with Speaker Gingrich. We go back a few years. Back in 1993, President Clinton asked me to help Democrats see the right way on North American Free Trade Agreement. The speaker was not speaker, obviously, but played an invaluable role in getting that done, and so it's a pleasure for me to be back with him. I do believe President Obama will win this election. I think we are now about 50-some days away from the election. It has been basically frozen popular vote for quite a while now. Coming out of the Republican primaries, I don't think Governor Romney did anything to move the ball for him to be more likable or more well-known or understood as to what he may do, other than to say, I'm not President Obama, therefore vote for me. So my sense is that we are now in the final weeks. The last great events are the three debates. I think the first debate is the only one that will really matter. I think it's up to the governor to take it, as it always is, for a challenger to take it to the incumbent. I don't think Governor Romney has done that. I think the American people understand in a positive way how difficult the situation was when President Obama came in. They don't blame him for the circumstances that he came in with. And they understand that he has been trying mightily with a number of good successes over the last 3.5 years. So I think they're willing, as most people are with an incumbent, to give the incumbent the break unless there's some great reason and great argument to be made on behalf of the challenger, which Governor Romney and his team has yet to make. If I may note, Mr. Speaker, through your campaign in the primaries, you made the case repeatedly that you have to say something big and say something meaningful in order to get the American people to take a look at a challenger against an incumbent. And it has to be major. I don't think Governor Romney has done that. I think the president has made a strong case as to what he's done and why he's done it, and why our economy, albeit struggling, the fact is we are creating at a very slow pace more jobs that were even created during the coming out of the recession in 2001. American people understand the depths we were in. So my sense is there's an eight-state race going on here, and the president, according to the polls today, is in a very strong position in Ohio, Florida, and Virginia. Two of those three, if they go with the president, there's no way Governor Romney can win this race.
Okay, just one quick thing. I know the acoustics here are bad, and I know people are having lunch, but could you please not talk? It's a very rare opportunity to listen to these two gentlemen. They've both traveled a long way to come talk to us. So if you're not interested in American politics, you are welcome to leave. But let's be respectful, okay? Now, we just heard, I think, an example of why Bill Daley is such a talented politician, because if you were listening closely, you will have noticed that he used Speaker Gingrich's own powerful arguments during the primaries to make his case for why Obama is actually going to win. So, Speaker Gingrich, is he right? And how do you assess the Republican chances now coming out of the convention?
Well, let me say, first of all, I am delighted to be here. And Victor, thank you for the leadership you're showing and the way this foundation has created an institution. I agree with Secretary Rice. Institutions matter. And the longevity you've begun to build here and the centrality of this meeting, I think actually is a useful contribution to the future, not just of Ukraine, but frankly, to an increasingly global dialogue. So thank you. And I want to build on your comment for a second. Anybody who here who is not interested in American politics, I want to paraphrase Trotsky's famous line that you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. You may not be interested in American politics, but your life will be affected by the outcome of this election. Whether it's Obama reelected or it is Romney, it is still a fact that the sheer weight of the American system will in one way or another make your life more interesting over the next 4 years. So you can ignore us at your own peril. Not that neither of us necessarily has an answer, but we at least will start you down a road. If the election were held today, I suspect that Obama would win. Luckily for us on the Republican side, the election is not being held today. The biggest reason he will win is actually, I think, two things. One is Bill Daley's old boss. Bill Clinton had a great convention, gave a great speech, reminded everyone what a real president looks like, gave a speech that was actually very, very double-edged if you listen to it, because he sort of said, I had the longest period of economic growth. By the way, Obama didn't. I got to 4 consecutive balanced budgets. By the way, Obama didn't. So it was a very interestingly double-edged speech. But it did give Obama the sort of stamp of approval that I think explains a good part of the current situation. The second thing I think is that the Romney people asked the wrong question in going into the summer and fall campaign. And I think did so, and frankly, I was part of this, and I would take some responsibility. We were trapped in 2 past images. One was the 2004 campaign, in which George W. Bush won re-election by defining John Kerry as unacceptable. And our assumption, which I think was right, is that that was essentially the Obama model. As Tom Brokaw said, this is a race between Romney saying things are bad and Obama saying he'll make them worse. But there's nobody claiming things are good. But we were on our side mesmerized by the 1980 Reagan-Carter campaign, in which Reagan asked the question, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? And it was the wrong question. And it was the wrong question because in 1980, people clearly understood that Carter was responsible, and people clearly held him accountable and decided to fire him, and after the debate by a surprising margin. People do not, or people in the United States are divided in blaming President Obama or blaming President Bush. And and in fact, technically, they're not dramatically worse off than in January of 2009 because things were falling apart in January of 2009. So the president can, in fact, make a case, you know, okay, it's not very good. It's the worst economy since the Great Depression. I've had 43 straight months at 8% or more unemployment, but I mean well, and at least it's not collapsing. If the Romney people can pivot and make the case for the next 50 days that your choice is between Obama stagnation and a Romney recovery, and convince people that there would be a Romney recovery, he will win a Reagan-sized victory. If he cannot convince people that he represents a better future, Obama may get reelected by a narrow margin, in which case I candidly think he will have an enormously hard time governing. And from a long-term institutional Republican standpoint, an election of 2014, after 2 more years of Obama, could be catastrophic on a grand scale for the Democrats, because I think he has built no mechanism for governing. I don't mean this as negatively. I'm just saying, you look at where we are. We are on the edge of a total mess. And so I think as of today, the Romney campaign can win. I think they have to make the case to win. It's not going to be given to them. I think the Obama team is very good. Bill and his brother and their tradition in Chicago taught the Obama team really well. And you're seeing the best of Chicago politics played out on a national scale. But if I were betting, I would bet that it is relatively easier in the next 55 days for Romney to make the case than it is for Obama. And I think the news, the economic news and the realities of things will be relatively against the president and will increase the difficulty of him getting to a majority.
Okay, go for it.
No, I would just take exception with a couple of things the speaker said. One, I think in order to make that case, you have to believe in something. And so far, the governor campaigning for 5 years for this has really never laid out what he's about and what he stands for. And to expect the American people to then get mesmerized in the last 50 days with a specific plan that he has yet to been able to really articulate that over the last 5 years is just a bridge too far for him, in my opinion, and for the American people to believe that. I just think he doesn't have it because he's not indicated he stands for anything. I will say that I do not believe we're on the precipice of a horrendous situation. I do believe if the president gets reelected, I do think in a final term, not having obviously to run again, not worrying, and is not somebody who is really tied to the Democratic Party in the sense of going all out to try to make sure 14 and 16. I do believe that there is a great opportunity. I'm more of an optimist, to be frank with you, Mr. Speaker, that there is going to be a coming together after this thing and the president wins. I would make the argument that if the governor wins, you know, it's, as you know, it's 6 months before you even get a team in place. It's a very difficult thing to pull off.
Can I just ask you quickly to respond to one other thing that Speaker Gingrich said, which is that, you know, you just accused Governor Romney of not really articulating or even having a positive agenda. I think Speaker Gingrich has said the same thing about President Obama. So does he?
Well, the president's been out there for 3.5 years with a plan that the American people are seeing having some results. You've had more, as I mentioned, more jobs created. Again, anemic. Yes, the unemployment has not gone below 8%. You've had more jobs created after coming out of this recession in the last 3.5 years than you had created coming under President George Bush 43 out of his recession. And you like it or not, you've seen progress on health care. American people's divided on it, but almost half of the people approve it and want it and wanted something done. You did see financial reform, again, a tough issue, but the American people want that. They want more Lots of people, part of the president's problem has been the left in our party has demanded much more from him than he has been willing to give. So this enthusiasm gap that people talked about for a long time was a result of his not being as liberal as some of his friends wanted him to be.
So, Speaker Gingrich, I would like to hear from you, particularly to the point that Bill raises about, okay, sounds great to have Governor Romney articulate a positive agenda, but he can't because he doesn't have one. And that was a criticism that you made quite eloquently and powerfully during the primaries, the hollow man.
Well, I think the challenge for Romney, and it's an interesting one. I was listening carefully to Bill because he's very, very smart and he's very much a key leader in the Democratic Party, and I was taking notes for things to think about after this was over. The challenge for Mitt Romney is not that he doesn't have a plan, because in fact he has lots of material out there. He has lots of ideas. His American energy independence plan is in fact remarkably congruent with where reality is going. We're the #1 natural gas producer in the world. We will be the #1 oil producer by the end of the decade. There's a revolution underway in energy that's amazing. The Romney challenge is something very different, I think, and it's actually a Republican challenge with the singular exception of Ronald Reagan, who was a FDR Democrat and had changed parties. Republicans are essentially a managerial party. They talk in the language and the rhythm of a business boardroom. Mitt Romney was terrifically effective raising money as a businessman at Bain, and he was very effective raising money as a candidate because in the boardroom he's convincing because he's calm, he's dispassionate, he's analytical. Those are terrific characteristics in a boardroom. They are really weak characteristics if you're on the stump trying to convince the country to reach into their heart and go through a fundamental risk. And I agree with the point Bill made. It is a fundamental risk to change presidents. I mean, whatever the current guy is doing, he at least has been president. And the next person, you don't quite know yet. And in 1980, Reagan, and people forget this, Reagan entered the fall of 1980 9 points behind Carter, and he had a terrible opening week. I mean, the Labor Day week for Reagan was so bad, they brought back an old professional, Stu Spencer, and put him on the airplane to just help Reagan get through the next couple of weeks because they were so rattled. So and when they got to the debate, the country looked up, looked at Carter for a minute, looked at Reagan and said, he's okay, and I'm not going to do this again. But it took, and then within 10 days of the debate, Reagan was 10 points ahead. He actually carries more states in 1980 than FDR carried beating Herbert Hoover in 1932. People don't tend to remember this, but he won a huge victory in 1980. It all happened in the last 3 weeks. And I agree with Bill Daley. Romney, who, by the way, beat me in the 2 debates that mattered. I beat him in 15 debates to get to a point where it mattered. And then I'm being fair and honest, he beat me in the 2 debates that mattered. Romney has to go into that first debate prepared to show the country a moral force and an intellectual clarity that the country looks up and says, okay, we've tried 4 years, we're at 43 months at 8%. I'm not going to take the risk of more stagnation, and you just convinced me you're serious. If he convinces, he doesn't have to be likable. He has to be serious. If he convinces them that he is a genuine alternative, he will win this election by a surprising margin. If he doesn't, he will lose it by a very small margin.
So, Bill, Speaker Gingrich makes a very powerful point. He is, as we are hearing now, incredibly eloquent, incredibly articulate, and Governor Romney did well in a couple of debates with him. So are you worried that Governor Romney is really going to rise to the challenge in the debates and that could turn the polls around?
Okay, there's one last chance, in my opinion, for the governor, and that is the first debate. He had a tremendous opportunity at his convention because that probably was the largest audience that he's ever spoken to. I think it was a good speech, a solid speech, but there's no doubt that Secretary Rice and others came out of that convention being talked about a lot more than even his convention speech. Clint Eastwood probably got more attention than anyone. But so there is one last chance. That's an enormous amount of pressure on somebody. Yes, he was good in the debates, but all due respect to all of the primary opponents, you go through those. That's very different than the 3 debates in the fall with just mano a mano up there, knowing that and the governor will know, in my opinion, by the time of the first debate, that this campaign is on the line that night, and that's a lot of pressure for somebody.
Well, let me say, first of all, I want to say on behalf of Callista and myself, we actually thought that Condi Rice gave the best speech at the convention. Not the most controversial, without Clint Eastwood clearly won that award, but she clearly gave the best speech and the most human and the most touching speech. It was both intellectual and personal, and so we were thrilled that you were going to be here, and we're glad to be with you. And I'd be thrilled to have you in a debate at some point with Barack Obama, or I would have been thrilled, frankly, to have you in a debate with the vice president, which would have been even more amusing. But I think that the governor, I want to say something in defense of the American system. The governor ought to be able to go into that room, and the governor ought to be able to get the job done. And if he can't, he shouldn't be president. I mean, you hire presidents for an ability, as Condi Rice lived through with George W. on 9/11. You hire presidents for the ability to suddenly face a totally unknown moment with totally unknown factors, and to reach into your gut and to somehow pull together leadership in the exact right way morally and historically, and then live it out. I mean, you don't hire presidents because they can raise money and hire good strategists and have great ads. And I think the debates in that sense are exactly the right test. And I think it's perfectly appropriate to say to Mitt Romney, you need to show up and convince us you have a plan for recovery, you really mean it, and you have the nerve to stand next to the President of the United States and beat him. Bill Clinton did it in '92 and was quite successful. Ronald Reagan did it masterfully in 1980, and it's a legitimate challenge to say to the governor, you spent all your life working to this moment. This is your moment. Now live it out.
Okay, that's the challenge. Bill, Speaker Gingrich in his opening remarks talked about how, one advantage that Governor Romney will have at this, as he rises to this great moment of his life is the economic data. And that is likely to be going against the president. We saw that right after the Democratic convention, some poor job numbers. Is he right, and are you worried about that?
Well, there's no doubt. In my opinion, the reason this is at all close is because of the difficult economic period we've been in. The president knows that. There is no reason, based upon historic figures, that this race should be close. We've never seen, as the Speaker has mentioned a couple of times, unemployment like this over a sustained period, and no president's ever gone into an election and won with numbers at this. However, the fact that the American people are willing to give a break to the incumbent, they do see change, they have seen progress in other areas, but that is the number one issue. It is always the number one issue. Foreign policy, yes, at times can be very important, and if an event happens between now and the election, as happened 2 days ago, it does have an impact. But it is the economy, as someone once said in 1992, it's the economy, stupid, it's always the economy, stupid. And that is the president's biggest Achilles heel right now is the economy. And in spite of that, he's still doing quite well, especially in the states that matter. And as you know, this is not a national election. This is right now, and this is part of, I would go back and agree again with the Speaker. This is an election that's really taking place in 8 states. Governor Romney, again, as the challenger, has not made this a national election, has not made this a crusade to take an incumbent out, and therein lies, again, part of his weakness.
Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned the events of recent days. Do you think that Governor Romney's initial response to Libya hurt him? Does that have any significance outside the Beltway?
I think it does have an impact outside the Beltway, and I think it did hurt him. I think you've seen, and I've watching the press from a distance, obviously, the U.S. press, he got beat up pretty good, not only by the press, he got beat up by a lot of foreign policy experts and a lot of allegedly Republican foreign policy experts. And I think he's backed off of his original comments, but it looked like an amateur operation. And again, when the American people go to vote for the President of the United States, they want to know that that person on day one and his team can handle it. And I think they failed the test the other day.
So, Speaker Gingrich, I was very pleased to hear your praise for Condoleezza Rice, and I think we're now all officially in love with her after her terrific remarks. She concluded her remarks by talking about women. And that is something that has been a difficulty, that's a demographic that's been hard for the Romney campaign. More generally, minorities also difficult for the Romney campaign. Did they make any headway in the convention? And looking forward, when you look at the demographics of America, are we looking at a permanently Democratic nation?
Well, you're looking at two different challenges. And I do want to point out, by the way, the original gender gap occurred in 1984 because Walter Mondale was doing so badly among men that there was a gap. Reagan was carrying women, but he was carrying men by a massively bigger margin. So let me start. Nobody ever talks about Obama's gender gap problem, but the fact is Obama's losing males by a huge margin, okay? The challenge for Romney's currently doing dramatically better than McCain among women, he's got to improve it very marginally to be totally competitive. But there are two parts to this. One is what Condi said towards the end is much more fundamental than a particular election. It is that to the degree that women are totally involved in all of the fabrics of life, which is what makes a little bit of the Democratic Party's strategy about a war on women kind of pathetic, because it narrows all of female behavior down to, reproductive rights or down to acquiring contraception. When in fact there are more women small business owners than men. There are now more women college graduates than men. Women have a lot of interests beyond any one narrow ideological position. And so I think it's very important for people to understand that this is actually on a worldwide basis important, and it's also important in the US. The Republican institutional challenge is very simple. We have, for a variety of reasons, some of them pretty stupid, underperformed and underfocused on minority Americans. We have an absolute obligation to develop an inclusionary, not outreach. Outreach is when 5 white guys have a meeting and call you. Inclusion is when you're in the meeting. And if you look around, I think the Romney people did a pretty good job of this, and the polls right after the Republican convention showed it was having a positive effect. A Susanna Martinez, for example, a Nikki Haley, begins to move both on minority status and on gender in ways that are very positive. And in all fairness, Condi Rice's performance was an enormous asset for us coming out of the convention. Now, it's been temporarily drowned by the Bill Clinton effect, which is really what the Democratic convention was about. But I have a hunch by next week you'll see us back on a more even basis.
Okay, I'm going to ask the two of you one more question, and then we're going to move to some questions from the floor. So, Bill, Speaker Gingrich, also in his opening remarks, painted this sort of apocalyptic picture of what happens in the event that you are right and that President Obama is reelected. That, America will fall off the fiscal cliff, there won't be a deal, that you will see real budget and economic chaos. What's going to happen, and I'd like you to talk about both scenarios. If President Obama wins, if Governor Romney is elected, how does that look?
We came last year, there's no doubt, and the president understands this as well as anyone, the single biggest thing we've got to do is deal with our long-term fiscal problem. We came very close last summer, a year ago, to doing that in negotiations with Speaker Boehner. It all fell apart, and then for the last 15 months, it's been nothing but campaigning. But the truth of the matter is, we came a lot closer. And the beauty of our situation, in my opinion, is the pain that we have to suffer with a real deal is not as difficult as people think, and the politicians make it to be. Yes, it would be painful to try to solve it. Yes, there has to be, in my opinion, new revenue entitlement cuts. But that pain is nowhere near the pain we're suffering now, and without that long-term deal, the chances of seeing our economy really grow back to where we want is impossible. The president understands that. I firmly believe that there will be a deal. I don't know if I don't think it'll be in the lame duck. I don't think it'll be right after the election. I think it's sometime between November and May when they'll get a real deal and get it done. There'll be tax reform. I think it's going to be much larger and a much more real deal than anyone expects right now. And therein lies an enormous opportunity for our country to get back on top economically.
Okay, and if Governor Romney wins, can he do a deal?
If Romney wins, the world ends as we know it. No, if Governor Romney wins, look at, I think, again, having seen presidents come in, difficult time to get a team together, get moving. I think there'll be a lot of bitterness in the Congress. I don't think he's going to have the sort of majority there that he could just ram anything through because of our rules. I think to do this all on the back of entitlement cuts will be a very difficult thing to do politically for him in his first year. And then he's going to be looking for some re-election, and that's going to be difficult for him.
Okay, and Speaker Gingrich, you have pretty unique personal experience of these kinds of situations. So,
well, let me take this in three parts. Part one is that by picking Paul Ryan, Governor Romney, in fact, has somebody who understands the Congress pretty well and who has a pretty clear plan. And my hunch is that, and Romney himself is a policy wonk, and Romney was governor of a state that had an 85% Democratic legislature. So I think that, in fact, they will have a plan. They have a much harder time if the Democrats retain nominal control of the Senate. But if they have, even if they only have a 1 or 2 seat control of the Senate, they will be able to reach out to enough Democrats. And Romney, I think, will start from the day after the election trying to piece together a 7 or 8 vote block in the Senate to vote with the Republicans. And my hunch is you'll see them move much faster than people think, because I think I'm told by friends that when they're both on the campaign plane, their idea of a relaxing time is to talk policy. I mean, they're policy wonks in the same way that Condi and I are policy wonks, and our idea of relaxing is to delve into some arcane issue until we get totally confused. So that's that part. Second, the only reason I say about Obama, and I want to make 3 points. The second point is about Obama. I think there are 2 reasons Obama will have a hard time. One, Secretary Rice lived through, and that is when you end up in a very partisan election in which the incumbent's major claim is he's worse, you build no capital to spend. And Bush, for example, came out and said he was going to spend his capital the Friday after the election. And I was very tempted to call Rove and say, there isn't any. I mean, a negative campaign doesn't build any capital. And the minute they had a Bush Social Security plan, it was doomed because 49% of the country, the minute you said the word Bush, was against the plan. So I start with Obama's problem is there are no people who are going to vote against Obama who are going to have any interest out of the tenor of this campaign in helping him. And that's why, and frankly, his skill set, he's a good orator, he's a good campaigner, he's a good visionary on his own terms. Clinton had been governor. Clinton understood all this stuff. Clinton had negotiated with legislatures. I was able to fight with Bill Clinton all day and cut a deal late in the afternoon, and we compartmentalized things so we understood what we were doing. I don't get any sense out of the president of an ability to have that kind of negotiating style. I want to make one last point about the nature of America. We are still remarkably a non-Washington country. There is a revolution in energy underway because private sector, very aggressive entrepreneurs just went out on their own and did it. There is a revolution in communications underway, which is about to have a revolutionary impact on American society. You look at things like the Khan Academy, you look at the impact of the iPhone and the Android, you're going to see a revolution in capabilities of organizing over the next few years. There's a revolution in productivity underway with Lean Six Sigma, which is revolutionizing the whole process. And I would suggest to you, if you want to see why America will probably reemerge without regard to Washington, look at Scott Walker in Wisconsin and look at Mayor Emanuel and the strike in Chicago. You are seeing a bipartisan consensus that we have to reform big government, and I give any Democratic mayor who's prepared to take on the teachers union enormous credit for courage, because it is very difficult for them to take on their base. And the fact is, in city after city, you're now seeing a fundamental move towards reform with no regard for Washington and no waiting. And Washington will be a following indicator, not a leading indicator of fundamental change in America.
If I can, don't you think, Mr. Speaker, that the thought that they will not deal with this fiscal cliff and the long-term fiscal problem is just, to me, it's just impossible to think, albeit very difficult. And quite frankly, when you became Speaker, you led the revolution to get the House. That was about you and ideas and a group of followers who followed you. All due respect to Speaker Boehner, he doesn't have that. He rode a wave in there. And what we experienced last year was that the tail was wagging the dog. If that doesn't change, then I get a little less optimistic. But I just can't believe that all of them, and I know the president, and I know what he's even been talking of during this campaign, that he's prepared to move and probably move pretty quickly.
Well, I think, again, it depends. I mean, if in fact the president has a willingness to offer a plan radically different than his entire campaign, and a willingness to adopt a tone radically different than his entire campaign, then who knows where we'd be by January, February. I'm just suggesting nothing he's doing today is setting a stage for him to be successful in a second term. And a lot of it, I mean, people should not underestimate, when he invited Paul Ryan down to Georgetown to lecture Ryan in public, that leads to a kind of personal bitterness that's very deep and very real. And in the end, as you know, because you practiced it your whole lifetime, politics has a personal part of it. All the people in here who are elected officials know this. There's a personal component to politics that is not easy for political scientists to understand and is impossible for politicians to forget. And this president is building zero reservoir of goodwill towards doing anything next year.
Well, let me just say, if anyone's been the target of negativity, it's been him for 5 years. Forget even before his victory. I mean, this has been the target of more craziness, more comments, rumors from where he was born and who he is and what his faith is to everything else. So that, but yet, in spite of that, and I saw this guy every day for a year, he doesn't carry that like other politicians do. And maybe therein lies my optimism for when the election's over. As you know, and all those who run for office have to do things when they run that they all cringe about, but yet they get over it pretty quickly after the election. So I'm optimistic, knowing him, that's exactly what will happen.
Well, I will say this. Optimism has historically paid dramatically more in America than pessimism. Churchill once said of us, we do the right thing after having tried every other possible option. And I suspect in that sense, sometime in either 13 or 14, there's a fair chance that you'll get to a grand compromise, but it will only occur if this president is prepared. You'll remember, Clinton and I negotiated 35 days face to face. I mean, if this president's prepared to actually lower himself to sit across the table day after day and negotiate as the constitutional equal, which the president's only the constitutional equal of the House and Senate, he could probably get something done, because in the end, people are going to put the country first. But he has got a deep hole to get out of before he's in that position.
Okay, well, I must say, listening to the two of you, I feel Ukrainian politics suddenly don't seem so unworkably Byzantine.
Maybe it's a setting.
We're going to now hear two European perspectives on what we've learned about the U.S. race, and then we'll throw it open to the floor. So first, I'd like to ask Hannes Swoboda, who is a member of the European Parliament and chair of the group of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists. Yes, in Europe they actually have socialists who are elected, and Democrats. Please. Can we turn on the mic, please?
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak. I hope people understood socialists and Democrats. So you can imagine on which side I am, but it's not a question of which side I am or my political group is, what would be the effect? The speaker spoke about the effect for Europe, and we will be affected by the election. The question is how far and in what respect we will be elected. Many citizens today, also in European countries, think there is not much change if a president or a government change, because there are so many conditions, so many interconnectedness where they have to react in a similar way. And therefore, many people who are still in love with President Obama are, of course, disappointed that some of the things he promised he has not done. But probably because in the environment, including the environment from the Congress, it was very difficult to do. So one of my questions to Mr. Daley would be, would there be more strength to President Obama after the re-election, or is, with a Congress which may be not favorable to him, is it still very hard for him to promise or to go in the way he promised? Secondly, on the economic field, here I must confess, I'm a very strong critic of an extreme austerity policy we do in Europe. We left Obama alone. Obama tried to produce economic growth. Obama, like many other countries, rose the investment. But Europe was going down with the investment. Europe is in a much deeper crisis than Condoleezza Rice said today. And we did not find, from my political point of view, a real stimulus for growth, in combination, of course, with reforms which are necessary. So we made life for Obama very, very difficult. But I fear, if I look to the tax systems and tax proposals, and both sides want to reduce some of the taxes, if you reduce the taxes, especially for the rich, like Mitt Romney wants, you get less support for demand and therefore jobs. So I don't think the concept which Mitt Romney is proposing is helping to promote growth in the United States. So that would be my criticism. Very disappointed I am also that it was not successful or not possible for the US and Europe to cooperate strongly, more strongly on the regulation of the financial markets. Because here we tried both in European Parliament and Congress to have some parallel legislation, which in some way, in some elements we did, but finally we were not successful really, because otherwise we cannot control financial markets if Europe goes a totally different way, like the US goes a different way. So again, I think that probably with Obama and a Democratic Congress it would be easier, but it was not really done in a sufficiently cohesive and common approach between Europe and the United States. Now we start now a free trade agreement, or free trade agreement discussions between the US and Europe, which I would favor very much, which would be important to promote growth and development in both in the US and Europe. I hope that both candidates and the president, whoever will be elected, are promoting that free trade agreement, because it is about a step towards creating a common market between the United States and Europe. We have to go together, and we'll come to that at the end of my brief intervention, because only together on many economic issues we can act. We have new competitors, common competitors, like China, but even like Brazil and India and so on. If we don't go together, we will be lost in many cases, therefore we have to go together. Cybercriminality has been mentioned and has been discussed quite rightly. Again, this is a subject for strong cooperation. We have a different concept on some of the issues, like the US on the European side. But again, we are those who have been the target of attacks most of the time, not only, but basically. And if we see now the criminal attacks against US embassies, and today also against the German embassy in one of the Arab countries, we see how very similar we are the target of certain people, certain groups, and how we have to defend our common interest. Now, on foreign security policy, again, I think Europe is more, even not only socialists and Democrats, but Europe is more on the side of Obama in the skepticism about military intervention. I don't say it should be avoided at any cost. Some military intervention are necessary, but we've seen the high cost of military intervention, especially if it's done unilaterally, and therefore I think to be more skeptic, it would be absolutely right to set much more on diplomacy, on pressure, political pressure, even if we cannot succeed. And we deplore very much the situation in Syria, but if we look to Iraq, the enormous costs, and still how many people are killed today, we see the limit of such military intervention. On Middle East, and I will come very soon to the end, on Middle East, I think we are closer, in general, Europe, closer to the Obama's concept. We are disappointed that what Obama promised did not follow with implementation in the Middle East. We would have seen or liked a much more active Middle East policy also by the Obama administration. But nevertheless, I think our common lines in the Middle East are very similar. One question, of course, is we have a very strong Cairo speech by Obama, which is very welcomed in the Arab world, but also in Europe. And I think, perhaps it's a question also to the speaker, if it would be possible for Mr. Romney to have some similar speech like the Cairo speech of Obama, because that was a very important speech in trying to overcome some of the cleavages between the Arab world and the Western world. That the extremists don't like it, that Al-Qaeda doesn't like the speech, I can understand, but I think it is up to us. And the last point, Condoleezza Rice spoke about the North Stars, two North Stars, Europe on the one hand and the US. My question really is it still possible if we see that the military importance and power is going down, and you spoke about leadership, to have two North Stars? Or isn't it our aim, not from one day to another, to have one North Star, which is closely US and Europe together? Because otherwise, if you see the development and the growth rates and whatever, also unfortunately the military investment in China and in many other regions, we have to work together very, very closely, so that out of the two stars, if you look at the population, we have now, I think, 7-8% of the world's population in Europe. It will be very soon 4 or 5%. I didn't compare it with the population in the US, but let's take it together and even add economic power and economic growth. Finally, we should end in having one common North Star with all the differences we have on many fields. But defending our common values, our common interests, I think US and Europe have to work together very closely. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we'll hear a quick response from the other side of the European political aisle from Elmar Brok, who is also a member of the European Parliament, and he's chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs.
Thank you very much. I consider Swoboda as a socialist, but a nice one. But Mitt Romney considers all Europeans are socialists. That shows a little of the problems. My most concern is not just with this campaign. It's a development in the last 10 years. In former times, I went to Washington, went to Congress. I admired always, despite the political differences, the way of bipartisanship and how senators and congressmen talk to each other and try to find solutions. And I have a feeling that is gone because of ideological fundamentalist debates in which I think it's not a positive development for all of us, and especially not for the United States. And that is the question now with the crisis. President Obama said Europe's crisis has to be contained in his speech. And Governor Romney spoke about, as I said, all European Union is socialists. But if I see the situation in the United States at the moment, after the decision of the Fed this week, we are in a very difficult situation here because of this debt crisis, financial crisis. This is not just the euro crisis. The euro is still 30% stronger to go towards the dollar as it was in the day when the euro was founded. But we are able, with a lot of pain, to cut deficits in all our member states, do structural changes, and have, under pain, a way of solidarity which would make us stronger when we go through to it from 2014 on, I believe. It's difficult, but manageable. But the United States, they discuss about have a higher ceiling for the debt and not to cut down deficits. The deficit of the United States is much higher than the deficit of the Eurozone. And I think here we miss a certain way of cooperation, which brings us together, the so-called old economies. When we want to win in these global challenges we face, where we have mostly common interests, I think we should not fight each other, but in this monetary question and other questions, we should cooperate, because we need each other much more in the future than we had in the past. And therefore, it's a pity that was President Bush and Chancellor Merkel for the European Union signed, to come up with a development of a transatlantic market, that has not really had progress in the last 6 years. And all of us look to China as our main partner. But the United States has a bigger trade relationship to Europe and Europe to the United States than to China. And the foreign direct investment is $100 billion euros every year from one side and then also the other side, which is much bigger than with China. But we do not cooperate. But if you come and Hannes asked you about it, this transatlantic market, then we would have a growth rate of 3% on both sides of the Atlantic. And we come together in a closer way that we can set worldwide standards in our interest and not waiting that others in the future will set these standards. And I believe that it's needed that we come to such a position which has an importance also for foreign policy. More and more economic strengths have to do with foreign policy power. And when we talk about our interest in the Middle East, in other places of the world, and then we would be in the pre-competition fields together on the economic side and develop that, I think that might a chance because of the demographic factor, despite the demographic factor, despite the growing emerging powers that Europe and the United States politically, culturally, and economically can play a role. And here I have a certain feeling that if I listen to this campaign, that this is not just at all in the mind of American politics.
Okay. A plea for you to get your candidates to talk more about Europe on the campaign trail. I'm sure that that will be crucial in winning the swing states. Now, we have a little bit of a chance to ask questions of these distinguished American political leaders. So I think there are mics around. Please ask your questions. Going once. Anyone have a question? Doug. Okay, well, Doug Schoen. Here too. We'll go to Doug first and then come to you. Could someone bring a mic over?
I'd like to ask Speaker Gingrich and Mr. Daley if they were advising the other candidate. That is, if Speaker Gingrich were offering advice to Newt Gingrich, and if former Chief of Staff Daley was offering advice to Mitt Romney. The question that I would ask is, in the interests of America and the interest of their campaign, what would you tell them to do that would arguably benefit their situation?
Okay.
What I'd say is probably exactly what Speaker Gingrich said about what Governor Romney has to do to get back in this race. So I hope that the speaker stays in Europe for a few more weeks.
Yeah, well, look, I would actually give President Obama the same advice I'd give Mitt Romney. What Obama needs to do is delegate all of the definition of Romney to his surrogates and his ad campaign. And he needs to go around the country and give a series of visionary, positive, optimistic explanations of why America's third century is going to be even better. America is a country that wants to bet on an optimistic future. American people want to know that there is a bigger, better, I mean, again, we're not big on by the way, in passing, I'll tell you, I would never recommend to either candidate to talk about Europe because the net effect of that on the average American voter is zero. The average American voter doesn't want to hear about Europe. They want to hear about America. What they want to know is, when am I getting a job? Or when is my son going to move out? What can I do to get my son a job? Or how can I afford gasoline? And so in a political campaign, you're in a very different environment than in a governing setting. And I would urge them both to stick to the economy for the near future. But I think the president would be very well served to go back to the style and the optimism and the positiveness that he had in 2008 and skip. I mean, he's almost Nixonian in his dropping into a, let me run around and defame Mitt Romney, which may or may not work, but it certainly weakens him as a presidential leader capable of unifying the country.
Okay. Thank you both.
Question for both of our speakers, and it will be the question of super PACs. What do you think about the so-called super PACs? Because suddenly we have this big money in the campaign. I was last week in Charlotte, And you could see so much of negative campaign going on. So both parties will spend hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm afraid Republicans will be more negative. So in your view, what contribution is there for American voters? Because I think for us in Europe, no matter whether we come from a conservative side or liberal or social democratic, no matter whether we come from Germany or Britain or Czech Republic or Ukraine, this is something obscene, I would say. So what do you think?
Well, I don't disagree that the amount of money spent in our campaigns has gotten obscene. I do think that this is a new cycle with super PACs based upon a Supreme Court decision that is going to take this to a whole new level of very, very, very wealthy people being able to put in substantial amounts of money, and much of it never to be known who exactly gave. And to me, that's the most frightening thing. I celebrate the fact that people will give money, will participate in the system, and if you've got it, that's great. You want to support something that should all be transparent. But I think you're getting to the point now with some of these numbers that you really are getting close, and we'll see in this election. I believe if Governor Romney was to pull this off, then you would have to give credit to the amount of money that is going to probably end up being given on his behalf, which would be a frightening thing in our democracy, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, that if you have a $4 trillion government that increasingly controls everything in life, you're going to have enormous amounts of money spent to try to control that government. And so, in part, big politics is a byproduct of big government. You have a lot smaller government, you have a lot less interest in who controls it. I would say, second, that we believe in freedom in America to a degree that most European elites find frightening. And we've produced, the widest range of talent emerging to the presidency. You start with Jimmy Carter and come up from Carter to Reagan and so forth. You can get to be an American president with a level of entrepreneurship that is virtually impossible in most European political structures. So it's a very wide open system. I think the right answer is to go to a very simple model that says anyone can give an unlimited amount of after-tax income to the candidate if they report it every night. And you can find out on the internet who's giving to whom. But I actually believe in more freedom, not less. And historically, for the last 60 years, the Democrats had in the labor unions a countervailing power structure that was bigger, and what's now happened is private money can now match the labor unions. Wisconsin was the first test of that, and is a fundamental shift from the politics that began in the mid-1930s.
Okay, we have for our next session participants from Silicon Valley who are joining us via video link. So we have to start promptly. So we just have 5 minutes left here. I'll take the remaining 3 people I promised questions, but all in a row, okay? So please ask your question, and then you guys get to choose which question you answer. Always a lovely position to be in.
Ryszard Kalisz, former Interior Minister of Poland, and today Justice and Human Rights Committee Chairman in Polish Parliament. You both told many about economic crisis in United States and in Europe, but I have the question, very simple question for both discutants. What is your opinion about methods of killing of Osama bin Laden? Because it is a very interesting subject in last time United States.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you guys turn the mic on?
Women are much better than we are, that's true. Referring to Condoleezza Rice. I am also a Pole, but from the European Parliament, and I can agree with the Speaker Gingrich that Americans don't care about Europe, but they do about security. And that leads me to the question about the missile shield. Because, a Pole has been for many years perceived as a Trojan horse, American Trojan horse in Europe. But what is the result, the response from American politics, the current politics, to Poland? And 2 issues are still not being completed successfully. The missile shield and another issue, very particular, the visa. So the question is, do you know what is the future of the missile shield project under two different presidents? And also the question, if you can address the question about the visa program, free visa waiving for Poles. Thank you.
Okay, Anders Asplund has very kindly allowed his question to not be asked so that we can hit our deadline. Thank you, Anders. So please.
Let me take the first question, and if I understood you, sir, that was the Osama bin Laden raid. Having been the only non-national security person in every meeting with the president for the run-up for the 4 months before that, there's no question in my mind we did the right thing. There was no issue around whether we should or shouldn't. The president was intent on doing this. It did take, in spite of what some people say who weren't there and have never been in a room when a leader has to send men or women into war, it was a courageous decision. It was a tougher decision than some people think because of even Bob Gates has said he was against it, and Bob Gates isn't exactly a left-wing socialist. And so it took a lot of courage. There's no question in my mind it was the right thing to do for the United States, and it was the right thing to do for the world, and we are getting results from that action, no question.
Let me build on that. I agree with basically what Bill just said. I think it was the right decision. I think that, but I also think this goes back to our conversation about our relationship with Europe. We are faced with a crisis of radical Islamism, which makes Europeans very uncomfortable to discuss. And yet it's real. And you just saw it happening again and again this week. These are not random behaviors. They didn't happen to pick 9/11 as the day to go kill the American ambassador because they were available that week. That was a deliberate symbolic attack from a city which produced, by the way, a very large number of foreign fighters in Iraq. I mean, Benghazi was a hotbed of al-Qaeda. It's no accident that it was al-Qaeda's flag that flew over the American embassy in Cairo. I mean, this is a long war that none of us in the West, Tony Blair is the only major Western politician who has had the courage to say this is a much bigger, harder fight, and none of our elites are prepared to talk about it in any of our countries, including the U.S. The bin Laden event was the right event, but it was a small event compared to the long struggle we're now engaged in. On the missile system, here is a place where you probably have a real difference in the two parties. I suspect Romney would reopen the Polish commitment. I think he would build the missiles. I think Romney would be much more cheerful about having Putin mad at him. And I think that it wouldn't affect him very badly. And he would probably encourage the development of the maximum level of natural gas production in both Ukraine and Poland as the best way of stripping Putin of foreign exchange and leverage, and would do so with enormous cheerfulness.
Okay, so as a final conclusion, I would just like to give us all a flavor of the U.S. campaign trail right now. We've focused a lot on politics and on tactics. I'd like to hear both of you tell us, imagine this is a U.S. hall, what's your pitch for your candidate? Why should we vote for him?
Thank you. I think this president has shown a lot of courage in the face of the worst economic crisis that our country's faced since the Great Depression. He came in at a point where we were losing 800,000 jobs a month, the size of Charlotte, North Carolina, where we had our convention. No one knew at the time the true depths of the problem we were in. The auto industry was on its knees, ready to go bankrupt. I think he showed courage there. You could agree or disagree that it was the right thing to do, but it's had a positive result and has helped our economy and helped bring back an industry that is vital to us and is vital to the world. I think his courage in taking on the healthcare issue, when lots of people have talked about it over the years. Again, it was a messy process, as the Speaker knows, through Congress. I think he showed leadership there. The gentleman made a comment earlier about the financial crisis. Through that financial crisis, we had the first real attempt at financial sector reform of our legislation and rules and regs since the 1930s. It's not perfect. It's a lot better and a lot more responsible. We have a banking system that is very strong now compared to what it was when he came in. A lot of bad actors out, a lot of actions taken by the president that have improved that. And I think overall the president has showed leadership in the foreign policy, has not hesitated to protect our interest, which is his first obligation, and he has done it much to the chagrin of many people within his own party. But I think he has not hesitated in the ultimate obligation that he has as President of the United States to protect the American people. So I think, albeit no one in the United States, none of the people in the United States are happy with our economy right now, but I think he's laid the foundation. If we get that one big deal next year, that I think the U.S. economy is going to be very strong in the second half of his second term, and will be very strong going into the first quarter of this century. Thank you.
I guess my case for Romney starts, frankly, with the president, because by definition, you don't replace a president unless you decide the case against him is overwhelming. Most candidates for re-election campaign in 4 more years. It's very hard for Obama to go to the country and say, I'd like to give you 4 more years like the first 4. In the 11 presidencies since World War II, there have been 82 months in which unemployment's been above 8%. 43 of those have been under Obama. That means he's had more months at 8% unemployment than all the other presidents combined. In addition, this is 8% unemployment with the lowest male participation rate in the workforce in the history of taking that number. So you have a shrinking workforce which still is at 8% unemployment. And the question I would ask the American people is very simple. Do you really want 4 more years of this, or are you prepared to take a gamble on somebody who has been a successful job creator, a successful governor, somebody who's shown his seriousness by 6 years of seeking the presidency, and somebody who at least offers a hope that it won't be 4 more years? And I think that on that question, people will decide the election. If they decide they distrust Romney's future, they're going to vote for the stagnation. If they decide they can't stand the stagnation, they're going to vote to gamble on Romney's future. And I think that's what Election Day will come down to.
Okay, thank you very much.